Kimberly Wallace stared at her reflection in the grease-stained mirror of the diner's employee restroom, sighing as she yanked the elastic from her hair and let her dark waves fall around her exhausted face. The fluorescent bulb above flickered intermittently, casting shadows that made the dark circles under her brown eyes look even worse. Evidence of 3 consecutive 16-hour shifts, juggling tables at 2 different diners and a late-night bar. Her hands trembled slightly as she splashed lukewarm water onto her face, willing herself to stay awake just a little longer. She had no choice. She couldn't afford to collapse. Not when the bank had sent yet another final notice, threatening legal action if she didn't come up with $7,000 in missed loan payments. That threat had hit her like a freight train. Her father's gambling debts she hadn't even known about until the funeral had been crushing her for 2 years. She'd taken out a personal loan of $23,000 to pay off what he owed to various dangerous people who'd come calling after his death, but the loan itself had become an anchor, dragging her down no matter how hard she swam. The monthly payment was $800 manageable at first, when she'd had a better-paying job. But after losing that job and cobbling together work at 3 different places, she'd fallen behind. 3 missed payments. Now the bank wanted $7,000 immediately to bring the account current, or they'd send it to collections and start garnishing her wages. Now she was boarding the midnight commuter train to crash at her friend's apartment near the financial district, because she had an 8 a.m. meeting with the bank manager, her last chance to negotiate an extension. The only reason she was even able to make this meeting was because her manager had grudgingly given her tomorrow morning off. Kimberly could never have afforded to miss a shift otherwise, not with her rent 2 months overdue and an eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. That morning's encounter with her younger sister Mara had nearly broken her. Mara had looked up from her cereal, her 12-year-old eyes filled with worry that no child should carry. "Kim, why do you look so tired all the time?" her small voice had asked, fingers gripping her spoon too tightly. "Are we going to lose the apartment?" Kimberly had forced herself to smile, kneeling down and squeezing her sister's hand. "Baby, I promise everything's going to be okay. I've got it handled, all right? You just focus on school." It had been a lie, but she needed Mara to feel safe. What she hadn't told her was that she didn't even know if she could handle it anymore, because if the bank refused her extension and started garnishing her wages, they'd lose everything. Her landlord, Mrs. Tavularis, had been standing in the hallway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Their relationship had grown tense over the past 6 months, and though Mrs. Tavularis had been patient for Mara's sake, there was a limit to that patience. She'd already given Kimberly the eviction notice, 30 days to catch up on the back rent or find somewhere else to live. "I'm working on it, Mrs. Tavularis," Kimberly had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise I'll have something for you soon." Mrs. Tavularis had nodded slowly, but her expression remained stern. "I hope so, Kimberly. For both your sakes. I can't wait forever." Kimberly had nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. No matter how impossible the situation seemed, she had no choice but to keep fighting. Last call for the eastbound express to Financial District departing in 2 minutes. The announcement crackled over the station speakers, jolting her back to reality. She grabbed her worn canvas tote bag stuffed with loan documents, overdue bills, and a thermos of cold coffee, and sprinted down the platform, her second-hand sneakers pounding against the concrete. She barely made it through the doors before they hissed shut behind her, sealing her inside the nearly empty midnight train. She took a shaky breath, scanning the car. Only a handful of passengers dotted the seats, a sleeping homeless man curled against the window, 2 college students with headphones in, and she froze. Sitting in the window seat halfway down the car was a man who looked like he had stepped straight out of a crime thriller. His tailored charcoal suit fit him flawlessly, the fabric catching the dim overhead lights as he shifted. His crisp black shirt was unbuttoned at the collar just enough to reveal the dark ink of a tattoo creeping up his neck, something sharp and geometric that screamed danger. His dark hair was slicked back with precision, but it was the eyes that caught her off guard. Cold, calculating, emerald green and completely unreadable. He stared out the rain-streaked window, his bruised knuckles resting on his knee, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm. A gold watch glinted on his wrist, the kind that cost more than Kimberly made in a year. Everything about him screamed stay away. But the seat next to him was empty, and it was the only one available in the car. Kimberly's legs screamed in protest. Her feet blistered from standing for hours. She was too exhausted to care about the warning bells going off in her head. She slid into the seat beside him, deliberately avoiding eye contact as she dropped her bag between her feet and pulled her faded green coat tighter around herself. The train lurched forward, and Kimberly felt the man's gaze shift toward her. It lasted only a second, a brief, assessing look before he returned his attention to the window. But in that moment, she felt the weight of his presence beside her. A quiet, dangerous strength. A coiled power that was both intimidating and, strangely, oddly stabilizing. Kimberly tried to focus on the rhythmic clatter of the train, the way the city lights blurred past the windows. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her bank app for the 100th time, willing the numbers to change. They didn't. $47.23. Her monthly rent was $1,200. She was 2 full months behind $2,400 in back rent. Her father's bank loan balance sat at $23,000, and she'd missed the last 3 monthly payments of $800 each. The bank's letter had been clear. Pay $7,000 immediately to cover the missed payments plus penalties and late fees, or face collections. The math was impossible. Even if she worked every available shift, she couldn't catch up. She was drowning, and there was no lifeline in sight. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool glass of the window. The weight of exhaustion was too much. Her body betrayed her, her muscles finally giving up the fight she'd been waging for weeks. Her eyelids grew impossibly heavy. She tried to fight it, tried to stay alert, but the gentle rocking of the train and the warmth radiating from the seat beside her pulled her under. The last thing Kimberly remembered was the faint scent of expensive cologne, something dark and cedar-like, and the warmth of something solid as her head gently tilted to the side. Saverio Endrizzi had been staring at the city lights for the past 20 minutes, his mind running through the events of the evening. The meeting with the Kovac representative had gone poorly. Threats had been made. Blood had been spilled, not his, but close enough. The ache in his ribs where a knife had grazed him was a dull reminder that his enemies were getting bolder. He flexed his bruised knuckles absently, the gold of his watch catching the overhead lights. Across the aisle, 2 of his men sat with their backs straight, eyes scanning the car with the vigilance of trained predators. Thorne, his right hand, sat 3 rows back, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping a weapon within reach. Saverio didn't take the train often too exposed, too public, but tonight he'd needed the anonymity. Needed to blend in. Needed to think. And then she had stumbled onto the train at the last second, all frayed nerves and exhaustion, and dropped into the seat beside him like fate had shoved her there. He had noticed her immediately. It was impossible not to. She was a study in contrasts, soft, where his world was hard, fragile, where everything around him was armored. Her faded green coat was 2 sizes too big, her jeans worn at the knees, her sneakers scuffed beyond repair, but her face pale, delicate, with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights, held a quiet determination that intrigued him. He had returned his gaze to the window, dismissing her. She was just another passenger, another ghost in the city's endless parade of broken people. And then, she had fallen asleep on his shoulder. Saverio's entire body went rigid. His hand moved instinctively to the concealed Glock beneath his jacket, fingers wrapping around the grip. Across the aisle, he saw Thorne's hand move to his own weapon, eyes narrowing. But then Saverio looked down. Really looked. At the woman whose head now rested against his shoulder, her breathing slow and even, her face finally relaxed in sleep. There was no threat here, no calculation, no agenda, just exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep exhaustion. He held up his free hand, a subtle gesture that made Thorne pause. Saverio released the grip on his weapon and slowly, carefully, relaxed his posture. The woman shifted slightly, her hand curling against his arm, and something strange happened, something he couldn't quite name. The knot of tension in his chest, the one that had been there since the Kovac meeting, since the knife, since always loosened, just a fraction, just enough to breathe. He studied her face in the dim light. She looked young, mid-20s, maybe, but her hands told a different story. Calloused, raw around the knuckles, the hands of someone who worked too hard for too little. Her nails were short and unpolished, a band-aid wrapped around her thumb. There was a faint scar on her jaw, barely visible, and beneath the exhaustion, he could see the ghost of someone who had once smiled more easily. She murmured something in her sleep, something that sounded like a name. Mara. Saverio didn't move, didn't push her away. For reasons he couldn't explain, and didn't want to examine, he let her sleep. The train rocked gently through the tunnel, and for the first time in years, Saverio Endrizzi, the man who controlled half the city's underworld, who had ordered executions without flinching, who trusted no one and feared nothing, felt something close to peace. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Saverio caught Thorne's eye, and saw the confusion there, The unspoken question. What are you doing? Severio didn't have an answer. The train began to slow as it approached the financial district station. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her gaze unfocused. And then she realized where she was, who she was leaning against, and shot upright like she'd been electrocuted. "Oh my God," she gasped, yanking away so fast that Severio's jacket, which had somehow draped over her shoulders, slid to the floor. Her face flushed deep crimson. I'm so sorry, I don't know why I..." Severio turned to her with a calm, unreadable expression. He had perfected this mask over years of negotiations and threats, but now he let it soften just slightly. Not a smirk, not amusement, something warmer, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. "You needed the rest," he said simply, his voice smooth and accented Italian, with just a hint of something rougher beneath. As if having a complete stranger use him as a pillow for half an hour was the most natural thing in the world. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. Her cheeks were still flushed, her eyes wide with mortification. Before she could spiral into another apology, Severio leaned forward and picked up his jacket from the floor, brushing off imaginary dust with deliberate care. Then, without breaking eye contact, he draped it back over her shoulders. "Keep it," he said. "It's cold outside." She blinked, clearly stunned. I can't, this looks expensive." "Then don't lose it," Severio said, a hint of amusement creeping into his tone. Before she could respond, he pressed the call button above their seats. A moment later, the train attendant appeared, clipboard in hand, her gaze flicking between them with thinly veiled curiosity. "Coffee," Severio said smoothly. 2 cups, black, one with cream and sugar on the side. The woman beside him opened her mouth to protest. I can get my own." "I know," Severio said, tilting his head slightly, his green eyes glinting with something unreadable. "But I don't mind." The attendant disappeared, and an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Kimberly pulled the jacket tighter around herself, acutely aware of the expensive fabric against her worn t-shirt. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, assessing but not judging. "I really am sorry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I work. A lot. I haven't been sleeping well." "I can tell," Severio said, and there was no mockery in his tone. Just observation. The coffee arrived moments later, and Kimberly wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully. The first sip was heaven-rich and dark, nothing like the watery sludge she made at home. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring it. When she opened them, the man was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pity, not curiosity, something deeper. Something that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the coffee, and for not waking me up." Severio nodded once, his gaze returning to the window. Everyone deserves a moment of peace. The train slowed to a stop, and the automated voice announced their arrival at Financial District Station. Kimberly gathered her bag, suddenly aware that she was still wearing his jacket. She started to shrug it off, but his hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "I said keep it," he repeated, his green eyes holding hers. "Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" she asked, confused. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile. "In the possibility that we'll meet again." Kimberly stepped off the train in a daze, the expensive jacket still draped over her shoulders, the scent of cedar, and something indefinably masculine clinging to the fabric. She glanced back once, but the man with the emerald eyes had already disappeared into the crowd, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, who moved with the fluid precision of trained bodyguards. Who was he? She didn't have time to dwell on it. She made her way to her friend Elowen's apartment building, a modest walk-up 3 blocks from the station. Elowen worked the night shift at a hospital and had agreed to let Kimberly crash on her couch so she wouldn't have to make the long commute back home, only to turn around a few hours later. Kimberly let herself in with the spare key Elowen had left under the mat, collapsed onto the couch without even removing her shoes, and fell into a dreamless sleep that lasted exactly 4 hours. Her phone alarm shrieked at 7:30, and she dragged herself to the bathroom to make herself presentable for the bank meeting. The bank manager, Mr. Grimwood, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual expression of mild disapproval. He listened to her plea with the detached professionalism of someone who had heard 1,000 similar stories, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Miss Wallace," he said when she finished, "I understand your situation is difficult. However, the bank has already extended your loan twice. You've now missed 3 consecutive payments. Without a substantial payment, $7,000 to cover the missed payments, penalties, and late fees, I'm afraid we'll have no choice but to send your account to collections and pursue legal action, including wage garnishment. Kimberly's stomach dropped. $7,000? I don't have that kind of money. Isn't there any other option? Can't we work out a payment plan? The time for payment plans has passed, Grimwood said, not unkindly but firmly. You have 2 weeks. After that, I'm legally obligated to move forward with collections proceedings. She walked out of the bank in a fog, the morning sun too bright, the city too loud. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to come up with $7,000, or her wages would be garnished and her credit destroyed. With garnished wages, she'd never be able to afford the back rent. Mrs. Tavoularis would evict them. She and Mara would lose everything. The math was impossible. Even if she worked every available shift at all 3 jobs and didn't sleep, she'd be lucky to scrape together $2,000 in 2 weeks. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mara. Remember, you promised to help me with my science project tonight. Love you. Kimberly's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She couldn't break down. Not here. Not now. She clutched her bag, still carrying the expensive jacket from the train, and started walking, her feet carrying her on autopilot toward the subway station that would take her back home, and then to her first shift. She didn't notice the black Mercedes that pulled up beside her, didn't notice the tinted window rolling down until a familiar accented voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. You look like you could use a ride. Kimberly's head snapped up. There he was, the man from the train, leaning out the back window of a car that probably cost more than her entire debt. His emerald eyes studied her with that same unreadable intensity. But now there was something else there. Concern, maybe. Or calculation. I'm fine, she stammered, taking a step back. I can take the subway. The subway will take an hour, Saverio said, as if he somehow knew her route. And you look like you're about to collapse. Again. His driver, a massive man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek, stared straight ahead, expression carefully neutral. Through the windshield, Kimberly could see another car parked ahead, more men in dark suits. Every instinct told her to refuse, to walk away. This man was dangerous. Everything about him screamed it, but she was so tired, so desperate, and something in those green eyes made her feel, for just a moment, like maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone. Where are you headed? Saverio asked, his tone gentler now. Home first, she said quietly, then the Bluebird Diner on West 47th. I have a shift at noon. He nodded to his driver. We'll take you. Before she could protest, the door opened from the inside, and Kimberly found herself sliding into the leather interior, surrounded by luxury she'd only ever seen in movies. She remembered the jacket in her bag and pulled it out, the fabric still perfect despite being folded. I should return this, she said, offering it to him. Saverio glanced at the jacket, then at her worn coat, then back at her face. Keep it, he said. Consider it insurance that we'll speak again. The Mercedes glided through traffic with the ease of a predator moving through tall grass. Kimberly sat stiffly on the far side of the back seat, hyper-aware of the man beside her. The way his presence seemed to fill the entire car despite the spacious interior. Classical music played softly through hidden speakers, something Italian and melancholy. You didn't have to do this, she said finally, breaking the silence. I know, Saverio replied, his gaze fixed out the window. But I wanted to. Why? He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Kimberly felt pinned by the intensity of those emerald eyes. Because you fell asleep on my shoulder, he said simply, as if that explained everything. And in my experience, people don't do that unless they're either very foolish or very desperate. I'm both, Kimberly said before she could stop herself, then immediately regretted the admission. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Honesty, how refreshing. They rode in silence for a few blocks, the city passing by in a blur of steel and glass. Kimberly clutched her bag, feeling the weight of the documents from the bank, the impossible numbers that spelled out her failure. The meeting didn't go well, Saverio observed. It wasn't a question. Kimberly's throat tightened. How did you have that look, he said. The one people get when they've just been told there's no way out. She wanted to deny it, to maintain some shred of dignity, but what was the point? They're going to send my loan to collections, she heard herself say. I have 2 weeks to come up with $7,000, or everything falls apart. My credit will be destroyed. They'll garnish my wages. My landlord will evict my sister and me. We'll have nowhere to go. She expected pity, or worse, indifference. What she got instead was a thoughtful silence. As Saverio processed this information, his fingers drumming that same deliberate rhythm against his knee. "Your sister," he said, "the one you mentioned in your sleep." "Mara." Kimberly's eyes widened. I talked in my sleep?" "You murmured her name," Saverio said. "More than once. She's important to you." "She's everything to me," Kimberly said fiercely. "She's 12. She's brilliant and kind, and she deserves better than this. Better than a sister who can't even keep a roof over her head." The car slowed to a stop in front of a modest apartment building, Kimberly's building. She stared at it, then at Saverio. "How did you know where I live?" "Oh, I have resources," he said simply, not apologizing for the invasion of privacy. She should have been frightened, should have demanded he explain. But all she felt was a strange sense of relief. Someone knew. Someone saw her. Even if that someone was a dangerous stranger. "I need to check on my sister," she said. "Make sure she got to school okay." "Take your time," Saverio said. "We're not in a hurry." Kimberly hesitated, then opened the door. She ran up to her third-floor apartment, relieved to find a note from Mara saying she'd left for school. She changed quickly into her work uniform, grabbed her apron, and locked up. When she returned to the car, Saverio was on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian. He ended the call when she slid back inside. "Everything all right?" he asked. "For now," she said. As the car pulled away from the curb, heading toward the diner, Saverio pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, thick, expensive cardstock, with a single phone number embossed in gold. No name, no title, just the number. "Call me," he said, pressing the card into her palm. "Tonight, we'll discuss terms." "Terms for what?" Kimberly asked, her heart racing. "For a solution to your problem," Saverio said, his green eyes unreadable. "I'm a businessman, Miss Wallace, and I think we might be able to help each other." Before she could respond, before she could ask what he possibly meant, the car stopped in front of the Bluebird Diner. Kimberly stepped out onto the sidewalk, the business card burning in her palm like a coal. She watched the Mercedes pull away, disappearing into traffic, and wondered if she'd just been offered salvation or damnation. The lunch shift at the Bluebird Diner was brutal. Kimberly moved through the crowd on autopilot, balancing plates and forcing smiles while her mind churned with questions. The business card sat in her apron pocket, its presence a constant weight against her hip. Every time she reached for her order pad, her fingers brushed against it, and she felt a flutter of something between fear and hope. Who was he? What kind of terms could he possibly offer? And why would a man who traveled with bodyguards and wore suits that cost thousands of dollars care about her problems? "Order up," shouted Bram, the line cook, slapping a bell that made Kimberly jump. She grabbed the plates, 2 burgers and fries, a chef's salad, and a stack of pancakes and navigated through the narrow aisles to table 7. A family with 3 kids, the youngest throwing Cheerios at his siblings while the parents looked on with exhausted resignation. Kimberly felt a pang of recognition. That could be her and Mara in a few years if she didn't find a way out of this spiral. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, setting down the plates with practiced efficiency. The mother shook her head, distracted by the Cheerio assault, and Kimberly moved on to the next table. The shift blurred together in a haze of orders and complaints, and the constant ache in her feet. By the time her break came, she'd been on her feet for 5 straight hours. She collapsed into the back booth with a cup of coffee, pulling out her phone. 2 missed calls from Mrs. Tavares. A text from Mara asking if she'd remembered to buy poster board for the science project. And a notification from her bank app that made her stomach clench an overdraft fee for a transaction she'd forgotten about. Her balance. $12.73. Kimberly dropped her head into her hands, fighting the urge to scream. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep juggling impossibilities and pretending everything was fine. Something had to give. Her fingers found the business card in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, studying the embossed gold number. No name, no indication of who he was or what he did, just a phone number and a promise of terms. What did she have to lose? She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, a smooth, accented voice answered. "Miss Wallace, I was wondering when you'd call." Kimberly's breath caught. "How did you don't have my number." "I have resources," Saverio said simply. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" She glanced around the nearly empty diner. Bram was in the back, and her manager had stepped out for a smoke break. "Yes, I have 10 minutes before I need to get back." "Then let's not waste time," Saverio said. You need $7,000. I can provide it. Kimberly's heart hammered. What's the catch? The catch, Saverio said, and she could hear the hint of amusement in his voice, is that nothing in life is free. I would require something from you in return. I don't have anything to give you, Kimberly said, her voice cracking. I'm broke. I'm drowning in debt. I work 3 jobs and can barely make rent. What could I possibly have that you'd want? There was a pause. When Saverio spoke again, his tone had shifted, become more serious, more deliberate. Your time, he said, and your discretion. I don't understand. I need someone, Saverio explained carefully, who can move through certain spaces without drawing attention. Someone who blends in. Someone who appears ordinary. You would attend certain events with me, play a role, ask no questions about what you see or hear. In exchange, I'll pay off your immediate debts and provide a monthly stipend that will allow you to work fewer hours and spend more time with your sister. Kimberly's mind raced. You want me to be… what? Your girlfriend? Some kind of escort? Nothing sexual, Saverio said flatly, and the hardness in his voice left no room for doubt. This is purely business. You would be my companion at dinners, galas, the occasional business meeting. You would smile, make small talk, and most importantly, you would forget everything you saw the moment you left. That's it? Kimberly asked, suspicious. You just want arm candy who knows how to keep her mouth shut. I want someone authentic, Saverio corrected. Someone who hasn't been corrupted by my world. Someone who might actually… He paused, as if searching for the right word. Ground me. The proposal was insane. Kimberly knew that. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that men who traveled with armed bodyguards and made vague offers of money in exchange for discretion were not men to be trusted. But the rational part of her brain wasn't the one making decisions anymore. Desperation was. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Saverio replied. Take 24 hours. Call me tomorrow with your answer, but Miss Wallace. His voice dropped, becoming almost gentle. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I won't hold it against you. Sometimes the smart choice is to walk away. The line went dead before she could respond. Kimberly sat in the booth long after her break ended, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind spinning through scenarios. What would this mean? Attending events with a stranger, a dangerous stranger, if her instincts were right, playing pretend for money. It felt wrong, dishonest. And yet, she thought of Mara. Of the worry in her sister's eyes, the way she'd stopped asking for things, stopped dreaming about the future, because she'd learned too young that dreams cost money they didn't have. She thought of Mrs. Tavolaris's eviction notice, the 30-day clock ticking down. She thought of the bank's threat of collections, wage garnishment, the spiral that would never end. What choice did she really have? That night, Kimberly got home just before midnight, her feet screaming and her lower back a knot of pain. Mara was asleep on the couch, her science textbook open on her chest, a half-finished poster board spread across the coffee table. The sight made Kimberly's chest ache. She gently lifted Mara and carried her to bed, tucking her in and smoothing the hair back from her forehead. Mara stirred, blinking sleepily. Kim? She mumbled. Did you remember the poster board? Kimberly's throat tightened. She'd forgotten. Again. I'll get it tomorrow, she whispered. I promise. "Es okay," Mara said, already drifting back to sleep. Love you. Love you too, baby. Kimberly sat on the edge of Mara's bed for a long time, watching her sister sleep, thinking about the business card in her pocket and the impossible choice it represented. She thought about the man on the train, the way he'd let her sleep on his shoulder without complaint, the warmth in his voice when he'd said everyone deserves a moment of peace. She thought about the alternative, losing everything, moving Mara to a worse school district, watching her sister's dreams die because Kimberly couldn't keep them afloat, and she made her decision. The next evening, Kimberly called the number again. Saverio answered on the first ring. Yes, she said before he could speak. I'll do it. Whatever this is, whatever you need, I'm in. There was a pause. Then, are you certain? No, Kimberly admitted. But I'm desperate enough not to care. What happens now? Now, Saverio said, and she could hear satisfaction in his voice. We discuss the details. Can you meet me tomorrow night? There's a restaurant downtown Giacomo's. 8 o'clock. I work until 7:30. Then I'll have a car pick you up from the diner at 7:45, Saverio said smoothly. Wear something comfortable, And Miss Wallace? Don't be afraid. Whatever else I am, I keep my word. The line went dead, and Kimberly was left staring at her phone, wondering if she'd just saved her life or signed away her soul. The black Mercedes arrived at exactly 7:45 the next evening, pulling up outside the Bluebird Diner like a panther among pigeons. Kimberly had changed in the diner bathroom, swapping her grease-stained uniform for the nicest outfit she owned. A simple black dress she'd bought at a thrift store years ago, and a cardigan that hid the frayed hem. She'd done her best with makeup, covering the dark circles under her eyes, but she still felt painfully underdressed as she slid into the back seat. The driver, the same scarred man from before, nodded at her in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. Classical music played softly as they glided through the evening traffic, and Kimberly tried not to think about how surreal this all was. 72 hours ago, she'd been a struggling waitress with no prospects. Now she was being chauffeured to a meeting with a mysterious man who'd offered to solve all her problems in exchange for her company and silence. It felt like a fairy tale, or a nightmare. She wasn't sure which yet. Giacomo's turned out to be the kind of restaurant Kimberly had only seen in movies, all low lighting and white tablecloths, with a maitre d' who looked like he could spot knockoff designer from 100 yards. He took one look at her cardigan and thrift store dress, and his expression shifted to polite disdain. "I'm meeting someone," Kimberly said quickly. "Saverio." She realized she didn't know his last name. "And Drizzy." The matoda finished, his demeanor transforming instantly. "Of course. Right this way, Miss Wallace." He knew her name. Saverio had called ahead. Or maybe he'd sent a description. Either way, it made her feel both important and exposed as she followed the maitre d' through the restaurant to a private room in the back. Saverio stood when she entered, and Kimberly felt her breath catch. He wore another perfectly tailored suit, this one navy blue with a crisp white shirt, the top button undone to reveal that same geometric tattoo at his throat. His dark hair was slicked back, and those emerald eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "Miss Wallace," he said, his accent wrapping around her name like velvet. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I had a choice," Kimberly said, trying for levity. "You always have a choice," Saverio replied seriously. He pulled out a chair for her, and she sat, acutely aware of the expensive wine already breathing on the table, the way the silverware gleamed in the candlelight. A waiter appeared as if summoned, pouring wine into crystal glasses that probably cost more than Kimberly's monthly rent. She waited until they were alone again before speaking. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around the wine glass for something to do, "what exactly are the terms of this arrangement?" Saverio leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, the gesture of a man used to control. "It's simple. You will accompany me to various events over the next 6 months. Business dinners, charity galas, the occasional private party. You will dress appropriately. I'll provide a clothing allowance. You will be charming, attentive, and most importantly, you will observe, but never speak about what you see." "Why me?" Kimberly asked. "You could hire a professional, someone who actually knows how to navigate your world." "Because professionals are predictable," Saverio said. "They know the game, so they know how to play it. You don't. Your reactions will be genuine. Your discomfort will read as shyness. Your authenticity will be refreshing." Kimberly took a sip of wine, buying time to think. It was better than anything she'd ever tasted. "And the money?" 12,000 immediately, Saverio said, watching her reaction. 7,000 to cover your bank payment. 2,400 to clear your back rent. The remainder for immediate expenses, groceries, your sister's needs, whatever you require, and a monthly stipend of $5,000 for the duration of our arrangement. Kimberly's hand trembled, nearly spilling her wine. That's $72,000, total. Enough to stabilize your situation completely and give your sister the security she deserves, Saverio said. It was more money than Kimberly had ever imagined having. Enough to change everything. "What's the catch?" she asked again. Because there had to be one. Saverio's expression hardened slightly. "The catch is that my world is dangerous. You will see things that frighten you. You will meet people who would hurt you without hesitation if they knew you were anything more than decoration on my arm. You will need to be smart, observant, and above all, silent." "You're asking me to be complicit in something illegal," Kimberly said slowly. "I'm asking you to be ignorant," Saverio corrected. "There's a difference." Kimberly sat with that for a long moment, turning it over in her mind. Ignorance, plausible deniability, the ability to walk away with clean hands and a full bank account. It should have been easy. It should have been a no-brainer. But something in Severio's eyes told her this was a test, that her answer mattered more than the money. "I have conditions," she said finally. Severio's eyebrows rose slightly. "Go on. Mara doesn't know about this. As far as she's concerned, I got a better paying job. A promotion. Something normal." "Agreed. And if at any point I feel unsafe, if someone threatens me or Mara, this arrangement ends immediately." "Agreed," Severio said again. "Though I should note that anyone who touches you will answer to me personally." The way he said it, calm, matter of fact, like a promise of death, sent a shiver down Kimberly's spine. "What happens after 6 months?" "That depends," Severio said, his green eyes studying her face. "If you've proven trustworthy, I may extend the arrangement. If not, you walk away with your money, and we never speak again. And if I want to leave before 6 months, then you keep everything you've been paid up to that point, and we part ways." "I don't keep people against their will, Miss Wallace." Kimberly searched his face for any sign of deception, but those emerald eyes gave nothing away. He was either the most honest man she'd ever met, or the most skilled liar. She suspected it might be both. "One more thing," she said. "What do I call you?" "I barely know your name." "Endrizzi," he said. "Severio Endrizzi. In public, you may call me Severio or Darling, if the situation calls for intimacy. In private," he paused, something unreadable flickering across his face. "In private, you may call me whatever you wish." Kimberly extended her hand across the table. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Endrizzi." Severio looked at her hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "We have a deal," he agreed. "And please call me Severio. We're going to be spending a great deal of time together. We might as well be on a first-name basis." He released her hand and reached into his jacket, producing a thick envelope that he slid across the table. $12,000. Cash. Use it wisely." Kimberly's hands shook as she opened the envelope and saw the neat stacks of $100 bills inside. It was real. This was actually happening. "When do we start?" "Saturday," Severio said. "There's a charity gala at the Grandview Hotel. Black tie. I'll have a dress delivered to your address tomorrow, along with shoes and accessories. A stylist will come by at 3 to help you prepare." "I work Saturdays," Kimberly said automatically. "Not anymore," Severio replied. "Or at least, not at the diner. This is your job now. Quit the others if you'd like, or keep them for appearances. But Saturday nights are mine for the next 6 months." Kimberly thought of Bram's greasy spoon and the bar where drunk men grabbed her ass and called it flirting. Thought of the tips that barely covered gas, and the managers who treated her like she was disposable. "I'll quit them," she said. "All of them." "Good," Severio said. And something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Then let's eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." He wasn't wrong, as course after course appeared pasta that melted in her mouth. Veal so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. Desserts that tasted like heaven. Kimberly felt something inside her begin to uncoil. The constant anxiety, the bone-deep exhaustion, the fear that had been her companion for 2 years. It didn't disappear, but it loosened, just enough to breathe. And across the table, Severio watched her with those unreadable green eyes. And Kimberly wondered, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, what she'd just gotten herself into. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Kimberly paid off the bank on Monday morning, settling the $7,000 in overdue payments that had been hanging over her head like a guillotine. The relief was so profound she'd cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes. She paid Mrs. Tavoularis the full $2,400 in back rent that same afternoon. Her landlord's expression had gone from stern to shocked to grudgingly approving. "I got a better job," was all Kimberly said, and Mrs. Tavoularis had the grace not to ask questions. "A much better job." "Well," Mrs. Tavoularis said, counting the cash carefully. "I'm glad to hear it. You and Mara deserve some stability." Kimberly gave notice at all 3 jobs, enduring the knowing looks and crude jokes from her managers who assumed she'd found a sugar daddy. She wasn't sure they were entirely wrong. She stocked the pantry for the first time in months, bought Mara new sneakers and the art supplies she'd been asking for, and still had over $2,000 left for emergencies. Mara was thrilled. "Does this mean you can come to my science fair next month?" she'd asked, her eyes shining with hope that broke Kimberly's heart. "I promise," Kimberly had said, and meant it. "I'll be there." Saturday arrived too quickly. The dress Severio had sent was delivered Friday afternoon in a garment bag that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. When Kimberly opened it, she gasped. Deep emerald green silk, the exact shade of his eyes, she realized with a start that looked both elegant and dangerous. The stylist, a terrifyingly chic woman named Azura, arrived at 3 o'clock sharp with 2 assistants and enough makeup to paint a small army. She'd taken one look at Kimberly and sighed dramatically. "We have our work cut out for us," she'd announced. "But Saverio said to make you beautiful, and I never disappoint." 3 hours later, Kimberly barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress hugged her curves and made her look elegant instead of exhausted. Her hair had been styled in soft waves, her makeup subtle but transformative. Diamond earrings borrowed, Azura assured her, glinted at her ears. "You'll do," Azura said with satisfaction. "He'll be pleased." The Mercedes arrived at 6:30. This time, Saverio was already inside, and when Kimberly slid into the back seat, his expression made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was a work of art, studied, appreciated, but with a hunger beneath the surface that was anything but aesthetic. "You look stunning," he said simply. "You look the same as always," Kimberly replied, then immediately regretted the words. "I mean, you look nice. The suit is very nice." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Smooth. I'm not good at this," Kimberly admitted. "At any of this." "That's why it works," Saverio said. He produced a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate bracelet, simple, elegant, and unmistakably expensive. "May I?" Kimberly extended her wrist, and he fastened the bracelet with deft fingers, his touch sending shivers up her arm. "What's this for?" "Appearances," Saverio said. "A man doesn't bring a woman to these events without making it clear she's under his protection." "Is that what I am? Under your protection?" Saverio's green eyes met hers. "As of tonight, yes. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. Anyone who threatens you signs their own death warrant. Do you understand?" Kimberly swallowed hard. "I think so." "Good," Saverio said, settling back against the leather seat. "Now, let me brief you on tonight. The gala is for children's literacy, a cause the city's elite pretend to care about once a year. There will be approximately 300 guests, most of whom are criminals hiding behind charitable donations and political connections. You'll smile, make small talk about nothing important, and let me do most of the talking. If anyone asks about you, you're a consultant I've been seeing for 3 months. Nothing serious, but promising." "A consultant in what?" "Art restoration," Saverio said. "It's vague enough that no one will ask follow-up questions." The Grandview Hotel was a palace of marble and gold, and as Saverio helped her out of the car, Kimberly felt every eye turn toward them. He offered his arm, and she took it, grateful for the support as they climbed the steps into a world she'd never imagined belonging to. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the crowd. A string quartet played something classical and beautiful, and everywhere Kimberly looked, she saw wealth designer gowns, custom suits, jewelry that could have fed a family for a year, and danger. She saw that too, in the hard eyes of the men who nodded to Saverio with respect, tinged with fear, in the calculating gazes of the women who assessed her like a threat, in the undercurrent of violence that hummed beneath the polite conversation and clinking champagne glasses. Saverio guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing her to people whose names she immediately forgot. A silver-haired man who smelled like cigars and made jokes about offshore accounts. A woman dripping in diamonds who asked pointed questions about Kimberly's family. A younger man with cold eyes who looked at her like she was prey. "Smile," Saverio murmured in her ear during a break in conversation. "You're doing perfectly." But Kimberly didn't feel perfect. She felt like an imposter. Like any moment, someone would point and laugh and expose her for the fraud she was. She was reaching for her 3rd glass of champagne when a voice cut through the crowd, low, dangerous, and unmistakably hostile. Well, Saverio Endrizi. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." Kimberly turned to see a man approaching, tall, blonde, with the kind of sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his smile. He wore a white suit that stood out against the sea of black tuxedos, and everything about him screamed predator. Saverio's entire demeanor changed. His grip on Kimberly's waist tightened fractionally, his expression smoothing into something cold and unreadable. "Leofric," he said evenly. "Always a displeasure." Leofric's pale blue eyes slid to Kimberly, and she felt stripped bare under his gaze. "And who is this lovely creature? I didn't know you'd taken a pet." The insult was deliberate. Kimberly felt anger flare, but before she could respond, Saverio stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle but unmistakable claim of territory. My companion is none of your concern, Severio said, his voice dropping to a register that promised violence. Walk away, Leofric, while you still can. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Then Leofric laughed a sharp, brittle sound and raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense intended. I'm just surprised. You're usually so particular about the company you keep, and yet here you are, Severio said coldly, infesting what should be a pleasant evening. Leofric's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Enjoy the gala, Endrizzi, and do take care of your little pet. It would be a shame if something happened to her. He walked away, and Kimberly realized she'd been holding her breath. Who was that? She whispered. Trouble, Severio said quietly, and a reminder that this world is more dangerous than you imagined. Kimberly looked up at him, at the hard set of his jaw and the protective way he still held her close, and realized that whatever arrangement she'd agreed to, she'd just stepped into something much bigger and much more deadly than she'd ever anticipated. But there was no going back now. The game had begun. If you've made it to the end and haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to become part of this family. Also, do tell me in the comments what struck you most about the story. What was the greatest lesson it left you? I try to read all the comments, and I love knowing how these stories move you. Finally, I just want to say, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.